Well, hello everyone. Welcome to episode 14 of the Life Love God podcast. Life Love God is the autobiography of Norman Paulsen, who was a direct disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda. And what we're going to be talking about today is chapter 16, which is entitled Kriya Yoga Initiation. And this is a relatively short chapter, but there's a whole lot of information in here and a lot of personal thoughts about the spiritual path. So I think that you're going to enjoy this chapter. I found after reading the chapter 4 or 5 times that each time I read it, I picked something else up out of the writings of Norman. So I hope that you take the time to read and spiritually contemplate the thoughts in this chapter. So, and I'm quoting here, this is from the chapter. Shortly after moving to Mount Washington, I received Kriya Yoga initiation directly from Paramahansa Yogananda. It was a blessing to have him as my teacher. I knew that I had found that special person who could show me a pathway leading to the fulfillment of the greatest desire of my heart, to meet God face to face within the temple of my soul. And when I looked into his eyes, I felt I was looking into eternity. So at this time, at Mount Washington, Brother Norm had been taught both the Hung Sa technique and the Om technique by Brother Bernard. And then Yogananda had also trained the monks not only in Kriya Yoga, but in the energization exercises. Norm goes on, as a young monk, I was filled with the open heart of great love and devotion. Sensing this, Yogananda once grabbed both my cheeks and kissed me on the forehead. Master continually trained us to rein in the mind and meditate deeply so that our devotion and realization would continue to grow. He often said that it is the child always crying for the mother's love who gets the most attention. Yogananda himself once wrote, Kriya Yoga plus devotion. It works like mathematics. It cannot fail. So when Yogananda spoke about the science of religion, as he referred to the practice and study of Kriya, it is actually like a science. When you put Kriya Yoga practice, a physical practice, together with devotion, a spiritual practice, it's like mathematics. You add them together and they always add up to more. Leo Cox was another disciple of Yogananda who basically was at Mount Washington at the same time as Norman was. And, he recognized devotion, and he recognized the devotion that had filled Norm. His other fellow brother, Donald Walters, who we now know as Kriyananda, also recognized this, and he said in his own words that there was part of him that was actually jealous isn't the word, but envied the fact that he had such a childlike devotion to God. Anyway, this is what Leo Cox wrote in his own biography. He said, after Master's funeral was over, this is after Yogananda had passed away, Norman and I came out the front door and onto the patio. I looked over to the side of the driveway and I saw Rajarsi. Rajarsi was the second president of SRF, and he was Yogananda's most advanced male disciple. He had been a multimillionaire, a very successful businessman, had gone originally by the name of James Lynn and was renamed Rajarsi Janakananda. So Leo said, "Hey Norman, there's Rajasi. Let's go get his blessing." And he blessed us. Then he gave Norm a big hug. I was surprised. I had never seen Rajasi hug anybody. He hugged Norman and then he held him some more. He whispered to Norman, and I was close enough to hear it. He said, "You know, Norman, Master loves you very much." And this affected Leo Cox. He said this was really heartwarming to hear of Norm's devotion to God and to his master, Yogananda. So in this chapter, Norman writes about some of the things that were changing within him as he practiced yoga or Kriya Yoga. And those of you that have been initiated in Kriya Yoga, you all can relate to this because there have been changes in you since you began to practice Kriya on a regular basis. But this is what Norm wrote. At times in my practice, I had the ability to calm my breath, mind, and heart. My thoughts became still to the point where I could notice the cessation of one thought and the birth of a new one. I wanted to touch that place in between the thoughts wherein dwells pure consciousness, God, that life, that love which fills eternity and gives birth to all thought forms, including my own. Yogananda explained to us eager monks that Kriya is the highway to God, and it strengthens whichever spiritual path you are inclined to follow. With practice, Kriya calms and purifies the heart and mind, opens the eye of the soul, the divine gateway to the infinite. This gateway is the spiritual eye that can perceive the indwelling light and the bliss of spirit. So through Yogananda, we in the West were introduced to several very effective meditation techniques, including Hong Sa, Om technique, and Kriya Yoga meditation. Norm talked about this in this chapter. He said Kriya Yoga, or a similar technique, has been known to many inspired souls throughout history. It is an ancient science of advanced pranayama, or life force, or life energy control, that quickens the evolution of consciousness. Yogananda described it as an approach to the infinite accomplished by controlling the mind directly through life force control. He quoted the great Himalayan yogi Babaji stating, "Kriya is a revival of the same science that Krishna gave millenniums ago to Arjuna, and which was later known to Patanjali and to Jesus, St. John, St. Paul, and other disciples." So there's a promise that comes in this chapter too, if you read Norm's words. He says, "People seek happiness outwardly through the senses, but are the greatest of all sensations is God. When breath and life force are consciously redirected and revitalized by circulating them up and down through the spine, magnetizing all the cells of the body with light, it creates ecstasy and joy beyond description. God is ecstasy. One sensation of God, one touch, one taste, and you'll never find anything greater. In a moment of grace on God's time, when you least expect it, true experience of the infinite will unfold. The inner light and bliss will come blazing into your consciousness like the sun, with the greatest love you could ever conceive of, filling your heart and soul to overflowing." And here's the promise. "Those who practice daily, circulating the life current up and down the spine, will watch their lives change as the quickening of divine evolution takes place." So Norm goes on in his writings. He says, "One day when Boone and I," this is Daniel Boone, one of his other fellow brothers at Mount Washington. They were discussing the merits of Kriya Yoga versus other techniques of meditation, and Boone mentioned Kechari Mudra, which he called the king of all mudras. And Boone described it, and Brother Norm was able to perform it right away on the first attempt. And then Norm wrote, "From then on, I began to practice Kriya with my tongue in this unique position, experiencing tremendous results." So as you can see on the diagram here, the tongue is being pushed up against the soft palate here. And finally, where it says second stage, it's reaching back to the end of the soft palate and curling up and around up into the nasal pharynx. And you see in final stage, it's up there touching the underneath of the bones of the skull. So, Brother Norm described his first experience with Kechari Mudra in these words. "Deciding to try it, I pushed my tongue backwards and upwards until I felt the tip of my tongue touching the soft palate and the uvula which hangs down at the back of the throat. I found I was able to continue to push my tongue back and up into the nasal pharynx cavity. Gradually pushing on up, I began to feel a bone protrusion which is right under the pituitary gland. Closing my eyes, I immediately felt a very deep and blissful consciousness pervading my mind. Continuing to practice this mudra, I realized that the force of energy rising upward through the spine flows off the end of the tongue like a flame under a pot, and it is here that that final connection is made. By exciting the pituitary gland, the pineal gland begins to vibrate, and the two forces, the feminine and the masculine, are magnetically drawn to unite in the region of the spiritual eye. Therefore, Kechari Mudra works like an excitation or magnetic current to arouse and hasten the life forces in the body to join at this center of consciousness, the throne of God. If all energies are returned to the one source from whence they came, the divine is beheld." So one day a message came to Norm. It was, "Master wants to see you." And in Master's room, Yogananda said, "I hear you're doing Kriya differently these days." Norm answered, "Well, yes, sir, I am." "Well, show me." Master picked up a flashlight, and I performed the mudra. He backed up a step. "My Lord," he exclaimed, "you don't know how blessed you are. This is the way Babaji first gave Kriya to Lahiri Mahasaya. You have been an adept in the past, and your karma has allowed you to perform the king of mudras. Wonderful experiences will come to you. Go now and keep up your meditations, and don't talk to others about it." So I read this a few times before I realized the last part of that sentence, "and don't talk to others about it." It's like I realized Yogananda didn't want any of his disciples to become discouraged if they couldn't do Kechari Mudra. So he didn't want Norm telling them about it. So there are some caveats, and there's some preparation, there's some alternatives for doing Kechari Mudra. So the first caveat, and that was Lahiri Mahasaya and also Yogananda had said, do not try to do this artificially by cutting the frenulum underneath the tongue and allowing that the tongue to be loose. It can cause problems, and it's not the natural way to do that. Lahiri taught his disciples a preparation technique, which he called Talabya Kriya, and it's a very simple technique to learn. And when you come to Sunburst for Kriya Yoga meditation training and initiation, we can talk to you and you can learn about Talabya Kriya. So what Lahiri would do is he would have his disciples practice this method, this Talabya Kriya, for 3 to 4 months. And then if they were unable to perform the mudra by getting the tongue back and up into the nasal pharynx, he would teach them an alternative. or allow them to do an alternative for their meditation so they could move on and learn more. So some of those alternatives we also teach at the Kriya Yoga initiation. And by the way, if you're listening to this in September, we have a Kriya Yoga initiation coming up in October, and we have another one usually right at the beginning of the year. So watch your emails for that. I believe right now our Kriya Yoga initiation for October is already full, but there's still room available in January. So finally, I want to bring up something that I realized in reading several of these chapters, that both Brother Norm and Donald Walters, Kriyananda, often referred to Mount Washington as a hotel. And it's true, Mount Washington was at one time an upscale hotel before Yogananda purchased it, but the reference to it as a hotel had a totally different meaning. Norm wrote, "I realized anew how fortunate I was to have that deep desire to meditate. I was to see so many come and go on the spiritual path simply because they that was supposed to be lacked, because they lacked the perseverance or desire to make meditation more than a superficial habit." So instead of referring to Mount Washington as an ashram, it became known to some as a hotel because so many monks and nuns came and then left the path on a frequent basis. And remember, Norm was there less than 5 years. To say that he saw so many come and go, it tells you that it was pretty much like a hotel. But we should ask ourselves, how are we treating meditation? Are we treating it as a superficial habit that we do once in a while? Or are we developing the perseverance to remain on the path by meditating in the morning and in the evening and at other times, and continuing on a continual basis to move forward towards illumination? It's a question we should all ask ourselves. So I encourage you to purchase your own copy of Life, Love, God. It's available on the Sunburst online store and also through Amazon. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we ask you to leave likes and comments on our podcasts. Tell your friends about the Sunburst YouTube channel, and to prepare for our next class, read Chapter 17, Nehru, I Meet India's Prime Minister. God bless you and have a great month. Thank you.